Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Guess, and I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Ohio. It's a privilege to welcome you to tonight's spring legislative update, a policy briefing about the many pressing civil liberties issues facing Ohioans right now. As you'll see, our policy staffers, as you hear them this evening, are brilliant thinkers and analysts who are also brilliant tacticians and strategists. I know they're going to cover a lot of ground with you because there's so much to talk about on so many fronts. I want to thank you for being an ACLU supporter as evidenced by your attendance tonight. Thank you to all our donors, supporters, action team members, and board members. And if you are not yet a card-carrying member, we would like to encourage you to consider becoming a member of the ACLU of Ohio tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to our policy director, Jocelyn Rosnick.
Thanks so much, Ben, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of your day to share it with us. As Ben said, my name is Jocelyn Rosnick. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm policy director for the ACLU of Ohio. And we're here tonight to talk about just what the heck is going on at the Ohio State House. Our legislative session is 2 years long, and in that 2-year period, over 1,000 bills typically get introduced. So when you saw us last in January, we were kind of recapping what happened in the first year of the legislative session. And now we are here to tell you where things are headed as we near our lame duck session after the November election. But we actually get a little bit of a summer break. So we'll be reporting on everything from reproductive rights to LGBTQ rights to voting rights, criminal legal system reform, and everything in between. So I am joined by my colleagues on the policy team. We have Colin Marazzi, our Deputy Policy Director, Gary Daniels, our Chief Lobbyist, Patrick Higgins, our Policy Counsel, and Sean McCann, Policy Strategist. So before we dive into the meat of the night, I have a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who have joined us on Zoom, live captioning is available, and you should see a prompt at the top of your screen if you'd like to toggle that on. Additionally, if you have questions for me or my colleagues, and we hope that you do, please drop those in the Q&A section. So we do have the chat open for everyone. We hope that you'll engage with us and with other folks who are present tonight. But if you have questions, burning questions that you really want to get answered, the best way to do that is to drop it in the Q&A. And for those of you who are tuning in on Facebook Live, it's really easy. Just comment on that Facebook stream and my colleagues will text me your question. So with that, let's get started and dive in. And Gary, I'd like to start with you. So where are we in Ohio's legislative timeline, and what does that mean for all the bills that you're tracking?
Thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you all for attending here. I can't promise you very much, but I can promise you that what happens at the Ohio State House is the most crucial to your daily lives and your rights than any other government body or entity out there. So happy to have you on board for this particular event. I'll be very quick. As Jocelyn mentioned, Ohio runs on a 2-year legislative session. We are technically or theoretically a full-time legislature, which makes us one of the very few legislatures in the country like that. And we are now in our 2-year session, we are in that second year. So 2021 was the first year, 2022 is the second year, and we are now on what is essentially their summer and fall break. The second part of this second year, they typically like to go home about Memorial Day, and over the last several sessions, they don't come back. They're gone from Memorial Day until lame duck. And if you're sitting out there saying, what the heck is lame duck and why do I hear people say lame duck? Lame duck is the term for that little bit, that little sliver of legislative session that remains after the November election every 2 years. And it is during that time that they come back and they rush a whole lot of bills. They pass a whole lot of bills. Good luck finding anybody that can tell you actually what's in many of those bills. It is absolutely not the way to govern, and even the legislators will complain about this, but it doesn't seem to stop them from doing it every 2 years. So we are very mindful, like with every legislative session, that they will be back after the November election and up to all kinds of no good, but hopefully also some good things. And that's exactly what you'll be hearing more of here tonight.
Thanks so much, Gary. So Sean, I'd like to turn it over to you. It is officially well into June. We're sitting here on June 13th. That means it's Pride Month, yet as of today, Ohio is one of 29 states that doesn't fully protect LGBTQ people in housing, employment, and public spaces. Though some cities and one county do provide those protections, what we essentially have in Ohio is a patch quilt where you're gaining and losing rights depending on who you are, where you live, where you work, and where you go grocery shopping. We know the Ohio Fairness Act is a bill that would change this. It's kind of stalled, yet there are some anti-trans bills that have been making the rounds in the General Assembly. And I know it's a big question, but can you just tell us what is going on? What is happening with all these different bills?
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn, and thank you everyone for joining us. So what is going on? That's the million-dollar question with the Ohio General Assembly, as I'm sure our listeners are well aware. So like you referred to, we have a couple really concerning pieces of anti-trans legislation that is intended to target specifically transgender youth in Ohio. One of those you may have heard of is House Bill 454, sponsored by Representatives Gary Click and Diane Grundell, which would ban gender affirming care for minors in Ohio, which is, it can be multiple different treatments for youth that are experiencing gender dysphoria. And this is care that is supported by all the major relevant medical associations, the American Academy of Pediatricians, the Endocrine Society, et cetera. It is evidence-based care that is, rigorously supported by medical research. And this bill would just have a devastating impact on trans youth who are already at higher risk for mental health issues, at high risk for considering suicide. And we've just seen attack after attack across the country on trans youth. Ohio unfortunately has been at the kind of the head of that movement with bills like House Bill 454. So it has received 4 hearings in the House Families, Aging, and Human Services Committee. Unfortunately, more hearings are likely to come in the fall once the General Assembly reconvenes. We do believe that the next hearing, though, will be an opponent testimony hearing. So folks that would be impacted by this bill will be able to speak up. And in the 4th hearing before the summer recess, medical professionals were able to come testify and say, hey, this is what we do every day. This would be disastrous for these kids. We know what we're doing. We know that we and their parents know what's best for them, parents that are supportive of their children. So that is, for starters, a bill that we're obviously concerned about. And secondly, a lot of folks may have heard about the attempted ban on trans high school and college athletes that was snuck into a totally unrelated education bill, literally in the 11th hour, after 11 p.m., the last day of session before the OGA broke for its summer recess. This is the second time, and this happened over in the House, to clarify, this is the second time that the House majority has attempted to amend this bill, which is its own standalone bill, House Bill 61, into an unrelated bill. And essentially, as many people have heard, this bill would allow anyone to dispute the gender of a young athlete. And that athlete, under the language that was included in this particular bill, House Bill 151, that athlete would have to potentially undergo a genital inspection, extremely invasive, extremely inappropriate for minors, as many physicians have come out and said. And they might have to undergo a couple other tests involving a blood draw that the bill calls for 3 different examinations to occur. So obviously very concerning, very vaguely written, of course, to single out trans girls and trans women in particular who just want to play on the team that matches their gender identity. And even if these particularly concerning examination provisions that I just talked about were removed from the bill, this is still a horrendous bill that Governor DeWine said last year he opposed. And, Governor DeWine came out and said, let's let the Ohio High School Athletic Association and the NCAA and these other athletic organizations and the school districts determine what's best. They already have policies in place that allow trans athletes to participate, trans men and trans women. And, the other concerning thing about this bill is these school districts and the athletic organizations could face scores of lawsuits because anyone who feels they were deprived of an athletic opportunity. Anyone who suffered indirect or direct harm as a result of the bill can sue. And who knows what that means? Who knows if Johnny didn't get as many minutes in the basketball game as somebody else did, is that constituting being deprived of an athletic opportunity? So, it's a vaguely written bill that really, really is harmful for trans youth that just want to get an opportunity to play their favorite sport and, have a community through that sport. So the good news is that we are fighting back through the Ohio Business Competes Coalition, which is a statewide coalition made up of hundreds of businesses who support inclusive policies to bring our state into the future, to bring people back to Ohio, to send a clear message that Ohio is an LGBTQ plus friendly state, not a state that wants to single people out based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. And like Jocelyn mentioned, the Ohio Fairness Act through House Bill 208 and Senate Bill 119 is still pending in both chambers of the General Assembly. We're going to keep pushing for hearings on those, and we need your help to tell lawmakers that those are the bills we want to see move. And lastly, one quick thing to mention, we have also, our brilliant legal team has sued the state of Ohio on behalf of Equitas Health over a discriminatory law that would allow medical professionals and insurers to deny care to individuals based on religious or philosophical beliefs. So we're taking action on those fronts proactively to make sure that Ohio is an inclusive and welcoming state.
Thank you so much, Sean. And it is always good to be reminded that we are fighting back. We're doing what we can. We can't do it alone. So I do just want to note that my colleague Selena has been putting some things in the chat for folks. If you want to take action in support of good bills or against bad bills, please do take action with us. And I also want to note that we've had a couple of questions come in the Q&A, so please keep those coming. And I'd like to turn to education. So Colin, we at the ACLU of Ohio, we believe that all students in Ohio deserve an education that is grounded in honesty and facts. Unfortunately, there are multiple bills right now that would actually limit what teachers can discuss with their students in the classroom. And there's even some overlap in anti-LGBTQ legislation and restriction in education. So I'm wondering, what's going on in that landscape? What do we need to know about those bills?
Thank you, Jocelyn. And yeah, thank you to everybody for being here. Before I dive into the specifics of the bill, I would like to tell all the listeners out there to there will be some parallels here between, what I talk about and what Sean just mentioned regarding all the anti-trans legislation. And those parallels come in the fact that these are not Ohio-specific bills. A lot of these pieces of legislation are crafted by national think tanks and nonprofit groups and then disseminated, and these education bills are no exception. And the bills we're talking about today are House Bills 322 and House Bill 327. These bills are being sold to the people of Ohio as giving parents of students more choice and more transparency in terms of what is and is not discussed in their child's classroom. However, it has become apparent to those of us who are tracking these bills and talking to our elected officials about the ramifications of them, that these bills have very little, if anything, to do with the stopping of teaching, quote, critical race theory, or CRT, which has kind of been the catalyst for these pieces of legislation nationwide. Of course, we know CRT is not a part of secondary school curriculum in Ohio. That is a graduate level course that studies our legal and economic structures and their disparate impact on racial minorities. Instead, what House Bills 322 and 327 look to do is essentially censor and stifle and silence any sort of conversation about America's checkered past. Checkered past in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity, national orientation, essentially how we got to where we are today. And as the son of two public high school educators, It's very important, not only for me personally, but I think for the ACLU and the Honesty for Ohio Education Coalition, which the ACLU is a proud member of, that all children have this honest debate, honest reflection of American history. And these bills will simply prohibit that from happening. And how they will do that is by essentially scaring our education professionals, teachers, administrators, into just not having these conversations at all, because the penalties are so severe and the prohibitions are so vague. Prohibitions on anything dealing with, let's say, national heritage in terms of whether or not they have been able to excel in American society, obviously racial injustices in America's past. And instead of, encouraging these open conversations and honest debates, this bill seems to stifle that and seems to say, we're just going to ignore it and hope that we never have to deal with it in the future. And of course, we know that that's not how people and structures work past their problems. So there's a push to silence these topics in classrooms. But another key aspect of these bills is that it affects state agencies as well. State agencies such as an institution of higher education or a local police department. Gary always says a great line when he was testifying on these bills in the General Assembly, that the prohibition on implicit bias training included in these pieces of legislation would seemingly prohibit a police department from having those types of trainings after, say, a police-involved shooting incident. So very, very broad prohibitions that really will impact a lot of facets of our life. And then there's finally one additional bill that we are paying careful attention to, and that's House Bill 616. You may have heard about it already. It's gotten a lot of news coverage in the state and across the country since its introduction back in late May. But essentially what House Bill 616 does is that it takes the worst elements of House Bills 322 and 327, the prohibitions on discussing our national history with a frame of race and national orientation and ethnicity and gender, and it rolls in language from Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, which, as we know, was a very controversial piece of legislation that was recently passed in Florida that prohibits any discussion, any mentioning whatsoever of gender identity or expression in classrooms. And again, you can see how these bills are really designed to not solve any problems. They're designed to inflict pain and intended to divide. Now, thankfully, House Bill 616 earned swift pushback from a wide spread of Ohioans immediately. It has since only had one hearing in the General Assembly, but we will continue to monitor that bill and make sure that everybody has an understanding of what's at stake if this bill were to move through our legislature and potentially be signed into law. So a lot moving in the education space. We will continue to monitor it and make sure that our legislature knows that Ohioans deserve to have an honest education when they step into their school.
Thank you so much, Colin. As a daughter of a public school teacher myself, I couldn't agree with the points that you've made more, and it's good that we're fighting back and there's such a broad-based coalition working to combat these regressive bills. These bills touch on divisive concepts, and I would say these are divisive bills that, you put it perfectly, they seek to divide us. So I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about the criminal legal system. And Patrick, I'd like to kick over to you. Bail reform has been front and center in public conversation in what feels like years, because it literally has been years. It's been at the front and center of public debate for about 5-6 years now. There have been bipartisan bail reform efforts through House Bill 315 and Senate Bill 182. Those bills are right on track, going through the legislative process and then basically out of nowhere, suddenly in April, we have joint resolutions using the buzzwords of public safety that came out of left field. So what's happening in the world of bail reform? What's going on with the variety of bills that we have?
Sure. Thanks, Jocelyn. And I'll start by just calling back to something that Gary mentioned earlier in the talk tonight, which is, we're hoping for good in addition to the bad when it comes to bail reform, just like everything else that's happening over at the General Assembly. So like Jocelyn teed up, we have things I'm going to describe loosely as the good and bad bail bills in the Ohio General Assembly right now. And so the good, we'll start with that, and then I'll get to the bad news just to leave you with a little motivation to take action at the end. So the good, as Jocelyn mentioned, are House Bill 315, Senate Bill 182. House Bill 315 is sponsored by Representatives Leland and Hillier. Senate Bill 182 by Senators McCauley and Steve Huffman. And so you might know from hearing those names, but also pointed out, those are bipartisan pieces of legislation. They have the backing of both, all kinds of groups, whether it's policy groups from the more progressive side and the more conservative side, folks that are more central. Across the board, these bills have garnered the support from a broad coalition of folks who have put years of work into reforming our criminal legal system. They also have the backing of, at our last count, over 70 different groups, included faith groups, law enforcement, adjacent groups, educators, all kinds of people that recognize the need for bail reform at this very moment, years ago, tomorrow, whenever it's going to be, but we're asking for it now. And so quick overview of what those do, and I'll give the abridged version with my limited amount of time, and we'll refer you to some additional information should you want it. But what the good bail bills do is create a presumption of release for folks who are arrested for crimes in Ohio. So the way the system works right now is that many courts use something called a bond schedule. So the determining factor in whether or not you go home before your trial date is based on the amount of money that you have in your wallet and whether or not you can post the amount that's in that bond schedule. We don't think that's the right system, and neither do the folks who stand with us in this coalition, because we don't think that determining factor should be someone's financial resources. We think it should be that presumed release that I mentioned before, that instead of creating what we call a two-tiered system of justice, where folks without financial resources sit in jail awaiting trial, and those who have them can purchase the release, regardless of what kind of risk they pose to public safety. And so public safety is definitely the buzzword right now when it comes to bail reform. And so that gets us to our next point about the good bail bills, which is it really does center public safety. There's a lot of there's a game of tug of war happening in the bail space right now, which is, who actually is meeting the end of public safety. And we know that these good bail bills, Senate Bill 182 and House Bill 315, are the right means to that end. And the reason for that is, in addition to that presumption of release that I talked about before, they also permit courts and other, prosecutors, other actors in that system to say, wait a second, we don't want this person presumed release. We're going to set a hearing where that person's rights are going to be protected, but we can also consider public safety in a way that's tailored to the individual person, and again, not determined by the amount of money in their bank account. So we're proud to support those bills. We've been loud supporting them, and I think Jocelyn's next part of that question, which is what's going on with the resolutions, what's going on with these bad bail bills, and so. All of that progress over a year of post-introduction work on the good bail bills, again, years of work that happened before that, we saw the introduction of two pieces of legislation called joint resolutions, which seek to amend our state constitution. And those are, I think, I'll loosely call the bad bail bills here, are purely a political effort. They do not seek to create good policy. They do not seek to promote public safety. They are a means to an end that benefit a single political party, especially as we hurl ourselves into this election season. So what those do, which are House Joint Resolution 2 and Senate Joint Resolution 5, is their stated purpose is to overturn an Ohio Supreme Court decision that honored a longstanding, legal tradition and kind of consensus among folks in the system that the purpose of cash bail is to make sure that a person comes back for their trial date. The purpose of cash bail is not to punish a person, it's not to keep a person locked up, but the proponents or the supporters of these bad bail bills, the joint resolutions, they want cash bail to continue to be a mechanism that judges and prosecutors can use to set bail so high that a person could never, ever secure the release. And the reason we think that is not the right solution is that we have a mechanism in Ohio law that allows those same folks to be denied bail if they truly pose that significant risk to public safety. And so I'll get back to my point about this being a political end. So, you'll see, actually you heard, sorry, and Gary mentioned before that we're in a long process, 2-year General Assembly. There's, hundreds, even thousands of bills that go through our legislature. They take a long time. They're vetted through a committee process. They get through before they become a law. The joint resolutions were introduced at the very end of March this year and started having committee hearings in April. They've already worked their way through their respective chambers. They've been jammed through by folks who want to see a political opportunity to put the question of public safety on the ballot this November. And what they hope to do is to require judges, or say judges shall look to public safety when setting cash bail, and overturn that Supreme Court decision. We don't think that Supreme Court decision needs fixing. We've been very, very vocal in opposing those joint resolutions. I don't expect we're going to change our tone anytime soon. And we hope that folks walk away from not only tonight, but future advocacy, knowing that House Joint Resolution 2 and Senate Joint Resolution 5 are means to a political end, and that we have a much better alternative in the General Assembly that centers the presumption of innocence and really focuses on public safety in a way that many folks from across the political spectrum have come to the table and said, yeah, this is the right way to do it. So again, just to kind of leave you with a little tidbit: good bail bills, Senate Bill 182, House Bill 315, bad bail bill, Senate Joint Resolution 5, and House Joint Resolution 2. We'll continue to oppose those, and happy to answer questions when we get to our Q&A session about those.
Thank you so much, Patrick. So just to be clear, these joint resolutions made their way through the General Assembly. And so can you talk a little bit about the path forward for folks on both the good and the bad bills? Will folks be able to vote in November on the ballot on what we are lovingly referring to as the bad bills? And will we see movement, fingers crossed, on the good bills?
Yes, so Jocelyn stole my thunder a little bit. Fingers crossed that we will continue to see movement on the good bail bills. Right now, what we're seeing as the primary vehicle, or that main driver of progress in the bail space, is House Bill 315. That remains in the House Criminal Justice Committee as we headed into this summer break. We're hoping that committee and onto the House floor very quickly, so there's space for the Senate to take action on it during lame duck, which we've described before. The joint resolutions, yes, they've passed the respective chambers. They're continuing to be jammed through our legislature. We expect them to be on the ballot in November. And I'll leave one more little exciting thing to look forward to, is just to keep on the lookout for more information from us about that. More information about why that's not the right choice for pursuing public safety when it comes to bail reform.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Really appreciate those thorough updates on the good, the bad, the ugly, so to speak. And thank you to everyone who is putting questions in the Q&A. I have pulled a few. We've got really great questions. To keep the program moving, we're going to keep doing our popcorn issue area updates, and we definitely will have time for Q&A. So we'll stick to the world of criminal legal system reform for a bit. And Sean, I'd like to come back to you. This has also been a big legislative session for death penalty repeal or death penalty abolition. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why folks should care about this issue, why they should get engaged, and what's going on with the legislation.
Definitely. Thanks, Jocelyn. So yeah, death penalty abolition, another of our campaigns. Obviously, the death penalty, just on its face, it is arbitrary, right? It depending on the county you live in, you might be significantly greater risk for getting sentenced to death, getting put on death row. The death penalty is racist. It disproportionately impacts Black folks more than white folks. And in addition, it isn't even effective. There is no correlation between the death penalty and lower rates of violent crime in counties that use it the most, in states that use it the most, in countries that use it the most. And a lot of our counterparts internationally have either done away with it or are effectively on their way to doing so. So where does our campaign stand is the question. And we have, similar to our bail reform campaign, we have companion legislation, House Bill 183, sponsored by Representatives Adam Miller and Gene Schmidt, and Senate Bill 103, sponsored by Senators Nikki Antonio and Steve Huffman. House Bill 183 has received 5 hearings in the House Criminal Justice Committee thus far, which is actually the most of any abolition bill, any repeal bill to date in Ohio. Very exciting. And we are very hopeful that when the legislature reconvenes in the fall for its lame duck session, that we will be receiving a committee vote. Not we, House Bill 183, but I guess by extension we will be receiving a committee vote in House Criminal Justice Committee. We feel pretty good about our level of support, both in the committee and broadly. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that is not where it was 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. There are a lot of folks who have come around on the death penalty, including people like Representative Schmidt, who initially supported it, but then she really had kind of a change of heart and came back to the legislature wanting to abolish the death penalty once and for all. So we do see that level of support in not just the House, but the Senate as well. And over in the Senate, we've had 2 hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Unfortunately, things have stalled a little bit more in the Senate, but it's still 2 committee hearings over there. And we've got 2 sponsors that, have written op-eds and have made progress in their respective chamber. We've also got some really exciting programming coming up around the death penalty. Our phenomenal organizing team and our coalition partners in the No Death Penalty Ohio Coalition, the organization Ohioans to Stop Executions, which is Ohio's single issue death penalty abolition advocacy organization, and our partner Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center down in Cincinnati. Their organizing teams are working with ours to host some events, firstly around the 4th anniversary since the last execution Ohio carried out on July 18th. Governor DeWine has repeatedly delayed executions in Ohio because we cannot procure lethal injection drugs to carry out those executions. And that is the only approved execution method in the state. We've seen some other states like South Carolina go back and say, okay, let's bring back the electric chair, or let's bring back the firing squad. And we've seen those decisions get challenged in court. So Ohio has wisely not approved another execution method. And the governor has said, I'm just going to continue delaying these executions. And we do feel confident that should a bill reach his desk, that he will sign it. We think that, the governor in his faith is opposed to the death penalty ultimately. So what we're looking at with the Stay of Hope event across the state is just kind of commemorating 4 years since we last carried out an execution. And we're also looking at some programming in October that's very exciting, just kind of centering the exonerated folks in Ohio and outside of Ohio who were wrongly sent to death row, because that's another big issue with the death penalty, right? Is we've had around a dozen people in Ohio, and if I recall correctly, over 100 people nationally that have been wrongly sent to death row and later exonerated. So telling their stories is so vital in showing people, hey, it's not just all these other issues that we're sending people to death row that should not be there, that did not commit this crime, that were improperly sentenced. So that programming is really, I think, going to generate some positive momentum towards our campaign. And again, all the credit in the world to our organizing team, who is building power locally and across the state to repeal the death penalty once and for all. So all that being said, as with all of our relative actions we're taking, you can take action by joining our campaign, by writing your lawmakers, even submitting a letter to the editor to your local paper. Any of those things are really impactful and will help us keep the momentum going this year and beyond, should we not reach the finish line with death penalty abolition this year.
Thank you so much, Sean. Yeah, death penalty repeal is such an interesting issue for Ohio. Some states like California have an official moratorium. We basically have an unofficial moratorium right now because the governor has just chosen to kind of kick the can down the road. And while we do support and appreciate that, I think it's time to just cut ties with the death penalty once and for all and actually get those bills to pass the General Assembly. So fingers crossed. I want to pivot to another really critical topic right now, and that is reproductive rights. There are several different bills related to reproductive rights and reproductive justice right now moving through the Ohio General Assembly, but one pair of them is really at the front of public concern right now. Those are companion bills. They're the trigger ban bills, House Bill 598 and Senate Bill 123. Basically, these are pieces of legislation that would enact a total abortion ban if and when Roe v. Wade was essentially overturned. There's good news, bad news here. We'll start with the good news. As Gary mentioned, the lawmakers are now on their summer break. Most of them are out campaigning or vacationing. They are not constantly in committee. They're not ramming a bunch of bills through right now. And these trigger ban bills had several hearings, but neither one of them actually passed out of committee and then passed the chamber. So we don't have an active enacted trigger ban bill in the state of Ohio, which means unless something truly wild has happened, and of course, like I always have to grain of salt, asterisk everything that I say because things happen, but unless something truly wild were to happen, then a trigger ban is not going to be in place when the official decision day comes down in the SCOTUS decision for Dobbs v. Jackson. So we likely won't have a fully enacted or passed trigger ban bill in Ohio, but I can't make any promises as to what the Ohio General Assembly will or will not do once that Dobbs decision comes down. I think all eyes will rightfully be on the General Assembly during what we call lame duck. So they will be out and about and active and introducing new bills and pushing them through and working on other bills basically right after the November election through the third week in December. So that's something to definitely watch for. I do want to be really clear that the ACLU will never stop fighting for the decisions, a person's right to make decisions about their own lives and whether or not to have a child, if and when. And the ACLU is in really good company because a majority of Americans agree. A majority of people support the right to control one's body and future, including family planning. So there will be a lot more from us. You'll be hearing from us in the National ACLU in the hours, days, weeks, and months following that Dobbs v. Jackson decision day. But I do have one immediate call to action for folks. I hope you're registered to vote, and I hope you plan to vote in the August primary, but also in the November election. And we need every single person and everyone in your network to vote like your rights depend on it, because they literally do. If abortion is going to be left to the political process, then those of us who care about equality and reproductive freedom, we have to get engaged and we have to vote like our rights depend on it, because like I said, they really, truly do. And with that, it's like we planned it this way. I'm going to segue to my colleague, Colin, who is our in-house voting rights expert for the policy team. There's just an incredible amount going on in the world of voting right now. But Colin, let's start on redistricting. So do we have maps for 2022? What about 2024? What's going on in the world of redistricting?
Well, Jocelyn, the short answer is yes. Ohio does have maps that are currently in use for our current election cycle of 2022. We do not, however, have maps for any prior year as of now. Both our congressional map and our General Assembly map will only be in use for 2022, in which after this election, we will, throughout this election cycle, we will be actively drawing new maps since there is current litigation still pending on both sets before the Ohio Supreme Court. So that's the short answer. The long answer is it has been a torturous, long journey to get to where we are, and I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear that the landmark redistricting reforms that were passed in Ohio in 2015 and 2018 did not live up to the expectations of Ohio voters. I think it is evidently clear that what people stepped into the ballot box and voted for overwhelmingly in the previous decade did not come to be in 2021 and 2022. As somebody who myself voted for the reforms, I was shocked by the amount of manipulation of the process by key players and influencers within the Ohio General Assembly, as well as the Ohio Redistricting Commission. As Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor put in one of her most recent concurring opinions, ruling a General Assembly map unconstitutional, we have witnessed a stunning rebuke of the rule of law during this process. And what I mean by that is a absolute refusal by the members of the Ohio Redistricting Commission to comply with orders from the Ohio Supreme Court, from the highest court in this state. A state or a court that was granted original and exclusive jurisdiction for ruling on the constitutionality of both congressional and state legislative maps based on those reforms. So I don't blame the framers of these reforms. It's hard to anticipate one branch of government essentially thumbing their nose at another, and also thumbing their nose at the will of Ohio voters who overwhelmingly supported these amendments. But what we saw was kind of a textbook run out the clock strategy. As we know, Ohio had a primary election on May 3rd. And that date was kind of the line of demarcation, if you will. It was the circled date to where new maps had to be in place. The partisan actors involved in this process who wanted to create gerrymandered maps knew that. They used that deadline to their advantage by skipping deadlines imposed by the Ohio Supreme Court, passing and submitting obviously unconstitutionally gerrymandered maps so that this process would perpetuate itself. And by, again, simply refusing to act in good faith and to the will of Ohio voters. See, when the ACLU took these cases to court, I'll be frank, I didn't think we would have to win 6 times in order to, and we're still in the process of fighting and winning these cases, but we have certainly seen a structural flaw in the reforms to where there doesn't seem to be a way to come to a conclusion, and we're stuck in this purgatory between the Ohio Supreme Court continuously ruling maps are unconstitutional and the Redistricting Commission, or whomever the body is, either the General Assembly or the Commission, refusing to act in good faith to produce fair maps. So where we stand currently, both for the General Assembly litigation and the congressional litigation, the Ohio Supreme Court has been fully briefed. We are essentially waiting on a decision to come down in the congressional case moving forward. And we are also waiting to hear from the Ohio Supreme Court in the General Assembly litigation on several motions that were recently filed by the ACLU, as well as some of our groups that are joining in these lawsuits, asking the Supreme Court to once again hold a hearing, in-person hearing, compelling the commission members to come forth and say why they did not produce a new map in accordance with the Ohio Supreme Court's order, which set June 6th as the next deadline for a new General Assembly plan. As we know, the commission didn't meet, they didn't produce a map, and they frankly sent letters to co-members of the commission saying they don't intend to meet. So, the Ohio Supreme Court certainly has a lot on their plate when they are looking at the next steps of this litigation. I don't know how they will rule. I know, though, that the ACLU will continue to be there and continue to press our lawmakers and our map drawers to do what the people of Ohio said they wanted, which was to draw fair maps that gave an equal access to the ballot, an equal vote, and equal weight to each Ohioan's vote. And we will remain steadfast in that commitment. But in terms of concrete next steps, I wish I had something to say, but at this point, we are waiting to see how the Ohio Supreme Court responds.
Well, thank you, Colin, and we'll give you some time to think on that because there are a lot of questions coming in for the Q&A on redistricting. But sticking in the realm of voting rights, I have learned recently that some candidate mailers have been hitting people's mailboxes that actually say primary date TBD. So we know that we have elections coming up. There are also other voting rights related bills. What do folks need to know about August and November?
Well, I think the first thing people need to know is that we are having an election in August. And I don't fault whomever the candidate committee or whoever put those mailers together, because up until a couple weeks ago, nobody knew when the next primary for General Assembly candidates will be. It was only until a federal court intervened and overruled the Ohio Supreme Court and implemented a map that was deemed unconstitutional, not once but twice by the Ohio Supreme Court. It was only until that federal court order where we knew that August 2nd would be the primary date. So first off, Ohio is having an election August 2nd to determine the primary candidates for the Ohio General Assembly, meaning the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. The next thing they need to know is that there is still active litigation going on revolving around candidates for the August 2nd primary. Another, I would say just occurrence that happened with this implementation of an unconstitutional map by a federal court was that candidate filing deadlines had since been missed before a map was finalized. So candidates didn't know what district they were actually going to be living in, so which they could run in. The Secretary of State has since said that the candidate filing deadline has passed. So if you didn't file your paperwork, you can't be a candidate. And members of both the Democratic and Republican Party would-be candidates filed suit in the Ohio Supreme Court, asking to have those candidate deadlines changed. And review was granted. In that case is actively being litigated as well. But switching back to November, I think Ohioans really need to know that, it's a midterm election, so we're not voting for a president, but there is so much on the line, in this midterm election. In terms of statewide races here in Ohio, obviously we have the U.S. Senate race, as well as all 15 congressional elections. We have all 99 Ohio House elections and 17 Ohio State Senate elections as well. But we also have 3 Ohio Supreme Court elections in 2022, one of those being the Chief Justice seat, since Maureen O'Connor will no longer be able to run due to Ohio's age limit for judicial candidates. So a lot is at stake in terms of, statewide candidates with, the governor, attorney general, secretary of state, auditor are all up for re-election as well. As Patrick mentioned in his portion, we are expecting a bail constitutional amendment to be on the ballot in November, as well as a citizenship voting amendment to be on the ballot as well. And finally, I'd like to bring everybody's attention to another key set of races that really don't get a lot of attention, and that is for our State Board of Education. In Ohio, there are 11 elected members of our state school board. And interestingly enough, state school board candidates actually they have the largest constituency base in Ohio through a district. So in Ohio, State Board of Education members represent roughly 1.1 million people. That's almost a quarter or 25% more than a Congress person does. So these candidates represent a large amount of Ohioans, and they have a lot of influence in Ohio's education policy. They develop curriculum, they develop licensing standards for teachers, for charter school owners, as well as other virtual school options. They are the regulatory and administrator of those educational settings. So they have a lot of influence. In Ohio's budget, our education takes up roughly 1/3 of every dollar spent by the state. So there's a lot of money in Ohio's education system, and the state school board members have a lot of influence on what those dollars do and don't go towards. So there's a lot on our ballot in November. I would recommend anybody who has any questions in terms of what is going to be on the ballot or what district they're going to be in based off of these new maps. I highly recommend you go to the ACLU of Ohio's Vote Center webpage, to where they can have helpful links to where they can register to vote, find their new district, see where their polling location is going to be, and just get prepared to cast your ballot, because we know that once you plan to cast your ballot, you have a much higher likelihood of following through and actually casting that ballot. So please go to the ACLU of Ohio's Vote Center webpage, check out those resources, make your voting plan, and mark your calendars for August 2nd and November 8th. And yeah, I look forward to answering any election-related questions in the Q&A. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to Jocelyn.
Thank you so much, Colin. And I'll say it just one more time, vote like your rights depend on it, because they do. So thank you so much for all those details, Colin. And last but not least, we are going to end our substantive updates back where we started with Gary. So we've already heard about death penalty repeal, LGBTQ rights, reproductive justice, bail reform, education, redistricting, voting, and we know that that is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's going on at the State House. I know that you track dozens and dozens of bills. So can you walk us through the remaining greatest hits, so to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. I will be brief, because you have heard all of us talk a lot about what's going on at the State House, and I know we want to get to Q&A. When the legislators went home in May, I did a quick sheet for us to use internally of the bills we are following most closely. Not every bill, but the ones we are following most closely that we like to keep tabs on, and that was 37 bills. And I can assure you there are at least 50 or 60 or 70 out there that have the ACLU of Ohio's attention in one way or another, and we are working on those. But I wanted to discuss two matters in particular. Number one is there's been a variety of bills kicking around the State House that are a result of the George Floyd and related protests from 2 summers ago. Many of the legislators didn't like that, of course, and so as we have seen in other states, Ohio legislators have been hard at working on bills with regard to assaults against first responders, upping penalties for vandalism, things of that nature, but also some with very serious free speech concerns and ramifications. And so it is House Bill 109 that has us the most concerned. It's a giant bill. We could do a webinar just on House Bill 109 and we wouldn't even cover it then. But you can always find more on the ACLU of Ohio website and on social media. And so we are hoping this doesn't pass during the lame duck period. I think we've put up a good fight so far with us and other coalition partners on this. but that is a bill that is worth watching very closely. And again, you can visit our website to see particulars about that bill and past testimony and things of that nature. Number two is something that is not legislation, but it relates so much to our legislative and advocacy and policy work. And that is the coming creation of a felony sentencing database that will shed at least some light on sentencing patterns and related court movements and things like that. With regard to our overall criminal legal system, you might be surprised, if you don't pay attention to these things on a daily and hourly basis like us at the ACLU of Ohio, but if you wanted to know, for instance, in one day of 2021 or the entire year of 2021, how many people were in prison for a drug possession offense where the substance was fentanyl, and you can go on down the line of details you want. Nobody has that information. Nobody has anywhere close to that information. It is out there. It is decentralized, but we have suffered greatly as a state in our legislature and beyond by not having these types of details at our fingertips or easy to find. So a felony sentencing database is coming in true ACLU of Ohio fashion. We don't think it goes far enough. We think that it can be improved considerably. And so we have been working and lobbying in that regard. Right now, it's looking very much like a tool for judges to be able to examine each other's sentencing patterns across the state. But we want this information as widely available to everybody in Ohio who, for whatever reason, might be seeking this information: advocacy groups, stakeholders, prosecutors, defense lawyers, the ACLU, you on this call, everybody to be able to enjoy this information. So stay tuned with that. Public comment is due to the Ohio Supreme Court on this by June 28th. And so in the next couple weeks, you will certainly be hearing an awful lot more from the ACLU of Ohio about that particular issue and beyond. And in the meantime, like I said, we will keep following and working on the literally dozens and dozens of bills that we always do at this point of the legislative session.
Thank you so much, Gary. We really appreciate that. And we have now reached the end of our formal updates and are going to move on to Q&A. So I know we can't see all you, but those of you participating, if you just want to give a clap with me to my fellow panelist, I'm sure that would be appreciated. But I know you guys have a lot of questions. Some really good ones have been coming through. So I say let's just get right to it. We have had a few of the same question come in related to redistricting. So Colin, you are first up to bat. And the question is basically, are any groups or coalitions planning to put another Ohio constitutional amendment on the ballot? Something a la a truly independent redistricting commission? What's going on? Are folks examining this issue? If I had to wager, the answer is probably yes, but what's going on? We saw what is playing out right now, and I'm sure that folks want to turn that anger into energy.
Well, yeah, Jocelyn, and thank you for the question to whomever posed it. Yes, there are conversations taking place about what a potential fix would look like and how to go about this potential fix. I know we have identified, states like Michigan and Arizona that do have these independent redistricting commissions that are truly independent, not just bipartisan, but independent. And frankly, we saw this past cycle, the Michigan Commission and Arizona Commission put forth, redistricting experts from across the internet would call fair and good maps. Now, the question is that what are these reforms going to look like? What does the average Ohioan think needs to happen? What do people that are involved in this effort think needs to happen? Are there funds available? There's a lot of these questions that need to be asked and answered when you initiate a ballot initiative campaign. Ohio does have the direct democracy avenue for Ohio citizens to put things on the ballot. However, it is an arduous process. You know, signature requirements, both numerical and geographic, as well as, you know, the litany of other administrative tasks that must occur in a proper sequence in order for something to make the ballot. Not to pivot or change the subject, but let's just look at the case study of the recreational marijuana ballot initiative as a case study as to how procedural missteps can hurt that, as we saw that ballot measure actually fail to make it across the finish line and make it to the ballot in November. So that's a way of saying, yes, people are looking at it. Yes, people are very interested. You know, people are hurt by what happened over these last 18 months. People are, you know, frankly, really, really upset with how this shook out. And they want to do something to change that, as they should, as I do, as I think everybody on this call does. But, you know, there's a lot of planning that goes into these. There's a lot of commitments that a lot of people have to make, both organizations and individuals. So needless to say, we are on the beginning steps of this journey, whatever it could be, whatever it may be. But people are certainly talking about how we can improve the process. So what we saw happen over the last year does not happen again in future redistricting cycles.
Thank you so much, Colin. If and when we get there, give me a clipboard. Sign me up. That is actually a great segue. You mentioned marijuana legalization, and we have a question that came in for Patrick. The question is, I've heard the joint resolutions on bail reform are trying to rev up voters to the polls under the guise of safety and law and order to counter other voters who may be coming to the polls, perhaps to vote for legalizing marijuana. Now, as Colin mentioned, that marijuana legalization will not be on the ballot in 22. It's more likely to happen in 23, maybe. But I'm just wondering, Patrick, if you have anything more to say on the politics of the joint resolutions.
Sure. So, yeah, I think thank you for clarifying about the marijuana initiative. The joint resolutions, when it comes to bail, I think, you know, it's a very easy talking point, public safety, and who among us doesn't want to feel safe, whether it's in your homes, in your communities, where you go to work, anything like that. And so it's an easy sell. And this isn't to discount, you know, folks in the electorate who aren't, you know, living, breathing policy work. But I think, you know, they kind of, yeah, it's an easy talking point, easy to run footage that scares any one of us to say you need to vote this way or else. And so I think, you know, just getting back to that tug of war that I mentioned earlier, is going to be, the fight's going to be over, you know, what actually is public safety and does this do it? And so I think, you know, everything that we've encouraged from the beginning of our opposition to the resolutions is the acknowledgement that cash bail doesn't make any single one of us any safer. And for folks to really keep that in mind as they think about things like this. So a little bit of background. I mean, yes, we see folks who, you know, I think frankly have future political ambition backing this. We also, Colin pointed out before, that people are mad about redistricting, and that includes people from all over the ideological spectrum. So when we're thinking about a Supreme Court race coming up where candidates are running with party affiliation for the first time, and those candidates can run, one, with party affiliation, and two, trying to claim public safety as their own. It's very compelling for certain folks who want to claim majority in the court and want to claim future of, you know, what Ohio looks like. So huge political implications and you know, easy talking points that can help folks run up the score in whatever direction they want to go.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Yeah, I mean, it's telling that this is something, these joint resolutions are intentionally out there to overturn a Supreme Court of Ohio decision. And wouldn't you know, if we look to November, we have a couple of Supreme Court seats on the ballot. So there's a joke somewhere here about lawyers and the ability to do math. I'm a lawyer, so poking fun of myself here, but I can still put 2 and 2 together and read the room. Pivoting back, we have a question that came in on gerrymandering, but a couple of folks on the policy team have actually worked within the OGA. Sean and Colin, Gary's, been doing work in the legislature for years and years now. I'm the only one of us that's not actually based in Columbus. So I'm curious for my colleagues in a closer proximity to the State House, if you want to ponder this next Q&A question. So gerrymandering has determined who our lawmakers are for many years in Ohio. Consequently, the lawmakers don't actually represent the views of the majority of voters in the state. So we continue to suffer from extreme views of some of these lawmakers. So how, if we actually claim to have a democracy, can these folks still be allowed to continue to gerrymander Ohio districts in order to keep and control and remain in power? That's a biggie. I know that's a big question. And this is why we're fighting back, right? This is why there are so many questions coming in about district lines and redistricting.
Yeah, I will just take a quick crack at this, not answering the entire question, but just to say that, a constant, as we have seen this year, very recently, that just the passage of certain types of language isn't going to end this debate, this movement, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, you also need the courts to enforce that language, and we have been seeing some of that. And of course, we have not been seeing some of that. So, it takes more than just the language, and I wish it was easy as just passing ballot language or something similar. And then you always have to worry about what the next people in power are going to do with that. So, the big problem here is, of course, and I think probably everybody on this call, on this event gets it, but there's never going to be a day where we can pack up and go home and say we've solved all the problems. It's been a constant struggle. It's been a constant fight for well before all of us, and it's going to be one for after us. And we just have to make sure that we're getting the best government as possible that will protect our rights and our civil liberties. Not an easy task. I wish I had all the answers, but at least we are joined here together to talk to each other and inform each other about how that is best done.
Yeah, if I could just quickly add something, it's important, and I've had the pleasure of working with so many people in the redistricting space, both in organizations and individuals, just average everyday Ohioans wanting to have fairness in our elections and in our democracy. It's somebody said something to me that was very poignant, and it was that redistricting and drawing new lines is the politics of power. It is the issue that gets you to every single other issue. So frankly, this person was pretty upfront with me and said that I think it was naive of us to think that this was a one-time deal where all of our problems would be solved after passing this amendment, and the first iteration of the new process wouldn't have any growing pains. And as difficult as it was to hear those words, I think they were very true. I will say that one good thing that we have working in our favor, as voters, is that there was accountability built into the new redistricting reforms through the use of a short-term map in order to where there'd be an election in between. So there is an opportunity for folks who feel strongly about redistricting and how it went, how it didn't go over this cycle. There are officials, influencers, map drawers on the ballot in November 2022. They will be campaigning across the state. They will be asking you for your vote. And I would suggest any chance you have to interact with them, you bring up the prospects of fair maps and working to solve this problem. because as it stands now, you know, things have to change in order for the outcome to change. And the next best option, or the next option for the average everyday Ohioan, is to, write letters to their newspaper, keeping redistricting in the public forefront, because again, we can't solve, or we are limited in our options to fight back against these extreme measures when we always have extreme politicians representing extremely gerrymandered districts in the General Assembly.
Thanks so much, Gary and Colin. I'm going to give you all a break for a second and pivot to repro rights, where a couple of questions came through. One question is, it was suggested that we might need a trigger law of our own when the childbearing age death rate goes up. So some sort of measure of the deaths that are caused by an abortion ban. And the question is just, how do we actually monitor the effects of the ban? And if I'm being really frank, the system isn't set up that way. The system that is going to enact this type of ban doesn't necessarily want the dirty laundry aired out, but we can look to the pre-Roe days and see what was happening then. And I think the butterfly effect, the ripple effect of what will happen if and when we have a full ban in Ohio will be extreme, and we can't even really comprehend it yet. We know if Roe falls in a state like Ohio, that some individuals are going to be disproportionately affected, and some folks will always be able to cross state lines to get the care that they need. And we will be fighting every step of the way against that for equity. But it is really unfortunate. I mean, the Ohio Department of Health, the Department of Vital Statistics, those are the places to look to, but also your lawmakers. Right. But relying on the General Assembly, who would be the governing body to enact a total ban, I would be hard pressed to believe that they would also at the same time then enact legislation with reporting and other requirements. I just don't see that happening. So it's a great question. It's a really tough one. And there's not a clear answer. The crystal ball is pretty fuzzy as it sits before me. But thank you for the question. All right, going back to bail, we had a couple of questions come in, and I'm going to combine them. So the one is, will the bad bail bill stop the good bills, or can the constitutional amendment and the good bail bills coexist, and how might that look? And in terms of where folks are putting their energy, should people be trying to oppose the bad thing or push the good thing?
Those are some great questions. So I'll start off by answering the first one, which is the bills do not prevent one another. So there is a world where they can coexist, but is not a reason to kind of rest on our laurels and say, okay, let's just let this happen. And so I think, some important things to point out are that, one, included in the good bail bills are a provision that requires courts to conduct what's called an ability to pay determination, that requires a court to look at, hey, what is the amount that's necessary for this person to come back for their trial date? And that's kind of at the crux of all of this when we talk about wealth-based detention, which is putting an end to the use of excessive bail as a means for detaining someone. So basically, excessive bail is that which is more than what's required to make the person come back for their trial date. And I'm gonna stop now before I spiral too far into the weeds. But that's the important thing about the good bail bills, which is if the bad were to pass in November and become a part of our Constitution, we would still should see a world in which the courts are conducting ability to pay determinations, even when the courts are looking at public safety. And I think that's part of the reason why courts should be looking at that already. And we hope that the good bail bills will codify that. As far as the question about where should we be putting our efforts right now? And right now, I think At this very moment, the very right now, June 13th answer is we need to continue urging movement of good bail legislation. I don't want to say that train has completely left the station when it comes to the resolutions, but there is no, there's not further legislative activity, that's going to happen in the near term or in lame duck that's going to make or break this. So I think, the important end goal right now is making sure that we get some kind of guardrail set up, pass good bail reform that has that, broad bipartisan consensus that I mentioned before. And so that would be my right now answer. We could be looking at a different answer when we touch base about this in the future. I see Gary's off mute as well.
Adding to that very quickly, Patrick, you covered the near future, but you sort of rolled out the red carpet for me to talk a little longer term. 5 years ago, November 2017, Ohio passed Marcy's Law. It was a very, no matter what anybody thinks about the particular law, it was very vague, open-ended language that was people warned could be very much left open to interpretation. This involved victims' rights. And here we are 5 years, almost 5 years after the passage of that constitutional amendment, and it is still being litigated as to what exactly some of that language means and how it applies systemically and how it applies to individual people. And I have no doubt that if these bail amendments with their vague and broad language pass in November, that we will be seeing years of litigation with regard to exactly what that language means as far as the courts are concerned, which circles back around to our discussion tonight about how important elections are and who's on the Ohio Supreme Court and everything else.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Gary. Sean, I would like to turn it over to you. Can you talk a little bit more about Ohio Business Competes and what do folks do if they know a small business that might want to sign on? Is it still open for enrollment?
Definitely. So Ohio Business Competes, as I mentioned before, this statewide coalition of businesses that are committed to inclusive policies and committed to fighting regressive policies that are being pushed. And the organizations that work in tandem with these businesses, in addition to the ACLU of Ohio, are Equality Ohio, which is Ohio's kind of foremost LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, Trans Ohio, which specifically advocates for trans Ohioans, and the Ohio chapter of the Human Rights Campaign. So any of those, any of those partners are going to be able to connect folks to how to get plugged into the coalition, how a business leader can get involved, and really, as we know with the General Assembly, business leaders in these legislators' districts have a lot of influence, and legislators want to hear from small business owners and folks that work at small businesses. So. And Jocelyn, feel free to, obviously you're very familiar with OBC. Feel free to add anything I missed, but that's what I would say is these are the organizations that are behind the coalition, and they are always strategizing about ways that we can get through to legislators and say, hey, not only is this a regressive policy, but this is bad for business. This is bad for economic development in Ohio. This is going to drive all sorts of folks, but particularly younger folks out of Ohio. I think an interesting, going back quickly to the trans athlete ban, a young trans athlete who has, used her voice. She's a high school junior who plays softball. She has talked about how if she is not able to play college softball, perhaps if she's not able to continue pursuing her athletic dreams here in Ohio, she's going to go to college elsewhere. She's going to, pick up and move out of state. And I just think that's the perfect encapsulation of what these bills will do. The brain drain that we're facing in Ohio, the businesses that might look to locate elsewhere instead of Ohio. So the Ohio Business Competes Coalition is just such an important movement to show these legislators this is what's happening when you exclude LGBTQ folks and you just to score political points. This is what happens. There are so many consequences. Like you said, the butterfly effect with repro rights. It's the same in this space.
Great, thank you, Sean. And for everyone, I dropped a link in the chat so you can learn more about Ohio Business Competes. And there's even a form that you can fill out if you want to join up. I will say, fun fact, a couple months ago, we hit businesses in all 88 counties. So I think we completed every county and maybe even crested over 1,000 businesses signed on. So it's been a labor of love for the past several years now. Okay, one more question on redistricting, Colin. Will there be further action on the Redistricting Commission? And is there anything you can share about the commission not being held in contempt?
So I think both of these answers are going to be intertwined. I have to add the caveat that I do not know for certain. However, I would anticipate the Ohio Supreme Court in their latest rulings to, I think try things, try a different approach to try to get the Redistricting Commission to comply with their orders. I think as I mentioned before, the letters that were written by some members of the Redistricting Commission to others on the Redistricting Commission, essentially with a blanket refusal to come and draw new maps. I think that is a pretty blatant summation of what the commission members, or at least what some of the commission members are planning on doing. They can be continuing to delay and to stall, and with the hopes of drawing new maps in a world where Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor is not on the Ohio Supreme Court. I think that is kind of the crux of this conversation. Chief Justice O'Connor, the lone Republican to side with the 3 Democrats on the Ohio Supreme Court, has been a target of the General Assembly for months now, because she is the one effectively who is holding their feet to the fire and demanding that they follow the Constitution and draw fair maps. I believe the Ohio Supreme Court has all the tools necessary to make the commission meet and comply with their order to draw new General Assembly districts, and also new congressional districts, which we are still waiting on a decision from them for the second go around of that map. Now, turning to the contempt charge, I would be hesitant to attribute any sort of decision making to the court in terms of a very politically charged decision of whether or not to hold members of the commission in contempt. But if I could give my take as somebody who did spend time in the General Assembly, somebody who still maintains very close tabs, close connections with people at the General Assembly, I think this is a political calculation on their part, because, I think, again, in my opinion, I think the moment a contempt charge is issued or leaked or what have you, impeachment proceedings begin, or open talk of impeachment proceedings begin against the members of the Supreme Court whom would hold the members of the commission in contempt. In Ohio, the constitutional framework for impeachment is such that in this scenario, I would assume the Republican members of the General Assembly would be the ones pursuing impeachment, and they have the numbers in both houses to both file charges and convict in the House and in the Senate. I think that's a very dangerous, very high stakes game of political chicken that would be going on. But again, as somebody who has, decent experience, I think that is certainly factoring in to the decision. Now, whether or not that occurs is still yet to be seen. As we said, this is Chief Justice O'Connor's last year on the court anyway. So maybe she will decide to take the gloves off. I can't say for certain, but I certainly believe that we are nowhere near done unfortunately, with redistricting in 2022. I think this is something that is going to be perpetuated throughout the entirety of this year and essentially until 2024. I think this will be a recurring question.
Thank you so much, Colin. Yeah, everyone just hang on tight. We're not off of the merry-go-round just yet on redistricting. So hang on for a few more years. We are at the end of our time. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A that we didn't get to, but I do want to just provide some quick thoughts and resources. So we did have a question about critical race theory and whether or not it actually is taught in Ohio schools right now. And I just want to put a link in the chat to a video recording on pbs.org of Dr. Hassan Jeffries. And it's the video titled Misunderstanding Critical Race Theory. It's excellent. Dr. Jeffries is our former board president for the ACLU of Ohio, a professor at OSU, a brilliant person. And this is just a really, really wonderful 1-hour video if you have the time for it. Additionally, a question came in about some bills that haven't moved, haven't even really had hearings in the committee. One that was brought up is the sexual violence bill, House Bill 266. And the one thing I would say there is, you know, bills that are introduced before a certain date technically are required to get at least a certain amount of hearings through the process. But we know that committee chairs hold a lot of power. So if a bill you really care about isn't getting hearings, you know, it's great to reach out to the bill sponsors, but it's even better to reach out to the committee chair and blow that phone up. Make those phone calls, send those emails, send those postcards, send those letters. There's a bill that you want to move, let the committee chair and House leadership or Senate leadership know that you want that bill to have hearings. And with that, we are truly out of time. So again, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. If you were angered or energized by any of the conversation points tonight, then you can follow us on social media. You can make sure you're getting our emails and our action alerts. You can join our action team to engage even more deeply. And something new we have happening this summer, we want to hear from you. We are conducting a deep listening process, and we actually want to get feedback from 10,000 or more Ohioans. So we need you and all of your friends, your entire networks, to share your insights and thoughts with us so that you can put your fingerprints on our work in the years ahead. So my colleague will be dropping a link to the survey in the chat. It's a durable link. You can send it around to your friends and family. Please do just take a couple minutes to fill it out. And again, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us.